There's a certain kind of knock that don't ask if you're home. It announces itself like it owns the deed. That's what rattled through my garage that Thursday morning, louder than my air compressor and way more aggressive than the UPS guy. I was halfway through oiling the bolt of my grandfather's old Springfield rifle, savoring that quiet therapy only veterans and widowers understand, when I heard the bang, bang, bang that said "Trouble's here," and it brought paper. I looked up, already knowing the kind of person behind that door, the kind that dresses like power but talks like insecurity. Sure enough, standing on my porch was a woman in a lime green pantsuit so bright it gave my flagpole PTSD. She had one of those clipboards that screamed middle management cosplay, and a grin that told me she'd been waiting all week to deliver whatever bureaucratic nonsense she had planned for me. Leave a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. If you love wild, true-feeling stories packed with twists, justice, and just the right amount of HOA chaos, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's story is even more jaw-dropping, and trust me, the surprises coming next, you won't want to miss them. Now, I didn't retire from 28 years in the Army just to be harassed in my own home by what looked like the illegitimate love child of a traffic cop and a real estate agent. But here we were. "Good morning, Mr. Briggs," she chirped, like she rehearsed the line in front of a mirror with a glass of boxed wine. "I'm Vicky Spangler from Suburban Safeguard, LLC, acting on behalf of the Heritage Hills HOA Compliance Division." That last part had more syllables than sense. She flipped her clipboard toward me like it was a warrant, but I noticed something right away. The emblem at the top of the page was crooked, and the ink looked like it came from a $39.00 printer you buy when yours dies on tax day. "We've received multiple anonymous reports of unauthorized firearms activity on your property," she continued, clearly expecting me to faint, confess, or hand over my garage keys. Behind her stood a man whose security uniform fit like a hand-me-down Halloween costume, with the posture of someone who thought threatening meant don't blink too much. I didn't blink. "And you are?" I asked him directly. "Chuck Mason," he said, puffing out his chest like a dollar store action figure. "Security Enforcement Supervisor." I almost asked if he'd gotten that badge out of a vending machine or off Amazon Prime, but instead I took a slow breath and gave Vicky the smile I use when I'm trying real hard not to laugh in someone's face. "Ma'am," I said carefully, "before I let anyone inspect anything, I'm going to need to see some legal ID, jurisdictional authority, and confirmation from the actual HOA board that this visit is sanctioned." Years of military briefings taught me to recognize posture, tone, and bluff. Vicky's was textbook bluff. Her smile cracked for a second, just long enough to give Chuck a nervous glance, and then she tried to recover. "If you don't comply," she warned, "we'll return with law enforcement and a court order. This is your only chance to resolve the matter peacefully. Now, let me be clear. I've been threatened by men twice my size, with half the brain cells and twice the weaponry. I've been in real conflict zones. This was community theater." I gave her the kind of nod that says, "Thank you, now go away," and closed the door. No slamming, no shouting, just the quiet certainty that I'd seen enough. I watched from my kitchen window as Vicky stomped back to her sedan, a faded silver thing with a cracked bumper and two mismatched hubcaps, and proceeded to argue with Chuck like they were debating who forgot the scam script. Then they drove off. That's when I picked up the phone and called the smartest woman in Heritage Hills, Loretta Shaw, age 72, former county clerk, full-time truth hammer. "Loretta," I said when she picked up, "I just had someone claiming to be from the HOA trying to inspect my firearms. Said they had a court order coming. You know anything about that?" There was a pause, a long one. Then she said, "Oh, Lord. Dean, that sounds like Vicky Spangler. She tried that mess over in Birchwood Estates last year. Girl got her real estate license suspended for fraud and started this new racket instead. You just got targeted, honey. Now I've diffused bombs with less adrenaline, but in that moment, I felt something stronger than fear. I felt insulted. These people thought I was dumb enough to fall for a fake badge, a crooked seal, and a security guy who looked like he failed a job interview at Waffle House. That's when I made the switch, from homeowner to hunter. See, there's a saying we used to use in command briefings: observe, assess, act. I'd observed the knock. I'd assessed the costume party outside my door. And now? Now it was time to act. But not the way they expected. No yelling, no threats, just patience, strategy, and the quiet satisfaction of watching amateurs walk straight into a trap. Because if there's one thing I've learned from a lifetime of listening to people lie, it's that folks who fake authority always assume the quiet ones won't fight back. And Vicky, she was about to find out what happens when you knock on the wrong veteran's door. Loretta Shaw may not look like a threat to organized fraud in her pastel cardigan and orthopedic sandals, but I've seen battle-hardened sergeants flinch under her cross-examination. When I told her what happened at my door, she didn't gasp or clutch her pearls. She leaned back in her recliner, took a sip of mint tea, and said, "Oh, honey, she's back." That was all I needed to hear. Turns out Vicky Spangler wasn't new to this rodeo. She'd tried the same act over in Birchwood Estates, telling an elderly veteran she needed to inspect his attic for property alignment issues, then tried to charge him $2,000 for noncompliance. Loretta still had the complaint letter she'd filed on his behalf, typed, triple-spaced, and delivered with a post-it note that read, "Bless her heart, she's about to meet the law. You don't walk away from a chat with Loretta without a plan, a printout, and at least 2 reasons to sleep with your doors locked." Back at home, I switched out my cleaning rag for my laptop. See, what Vicky didn't know, and what most scammers count on, is that people my age grew up with analog brains and digital curiosity. I'd spent years in military intelligence, verifying documentation, spotting forged IDs, and exposing procurement frauds that made Enron look like a garage sale. So when I typed in suburban safeguard, I already had 5 browser tabs open for business registries, complaint boards, and property databases. What came back made me sit up straighter. Her company was listed under something called Home Ornaments Advisory, registered in Nevada, and linked to a P.O. box that had changed 6 times in 2 years. The phone number led to a voicemail recorded by someone who sounded like they were auditioning for Judge Judy. Every detail looked legal. Until you blinked. Then it looked like someone printed it at a Kinko's and rubbed it with toner dust for authenticity. This wasn't enforcement. It was theater, minus the talent. I kept digging. The seal on her clipboard? I found a matching design available on Etsy under the listing Custom Official Looking Stickers. The logo on her document? Reverse image search pulled up a graphic design blog called Fake Badges for Fun. But the kicker? Vicky had filed 3 ATF tips in the last 6 months, all claiming homeowners in quiet neighborhoods were stockpiling illegal weapons. All 3 were dismissed. I cross-referenced the names. 2 were veterans, 1 was a retired sheriff. All had clean records. My gut told me her scam wasn't just about fake compliance fees. It was reconnaissance for theft. She targets vets, assumes they've got valuables, uses fake authority to gain intel, and comes back later for the real prize. The pattern wasn't just sloppy, it was dangerous. And it was spreading like mold behind cheap drywall. I called Loretta back and laid out what I found. She didn't sound surprised. She sounded loaded for bear. "I'm bringing my binder," she said. "That binder, for the record, is less of an office supply and more of a legal flamethrower. It contains certified HOA bylaws, county statutes, and a color-coded section labeled Fraudulent Nincompoops." She was already drafting a formal complaint to the HOA board and had pulled up the incorporation documents for Heritage Hills. "There is no authorized inspection program," she confirmed, "and even if there were, it'd be carried out by a bonded third party with homeowner notice and board approval, not some woman dressed like a J.C. Penney clearance rack with a badge from a cereal box." I laughed, but deep down I knew this was no longer a game. This was chess, and Vicky had just moved her pawn into a queen's crossfire. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with my grandfather's pen and started writing everything down. The knock. The fake seal, the bad security guard, the way Vicky's hands trembled when I asked for credentials. It wasn't just about catching her in a lie anymore. It was about the principle. These people thought we were vulnerable. They thought we were isolated. They thought retirement meant retreat. But what they didn't factor in, what they always underestimate, is the strength of a community that knows how to fight smart. They didn't know about Loretta. They didn't know about my background. And they sure didn't know that the next time they knocked, we'd be ready with more than a polite refusal. We'd have a plan. And tomorrow, that plan begins with bait. Stick around. You're going to want to see what happens when the hunter becomes the one setting the trap. Leave a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. If you love wild, true-feeling stories packed with twists, justice, and just the right amount of HOA chaos, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's story is even more jaw-dropping, and trust me, the surprises coming next, you won't want to miss them. By Friday morning, I'd stopped cleaning guns and started cleaning lenses. Because when you find a surveillance camera in your garage, about the size of a breath mint and just as easy to miss, your priorities shift fast. It was tucked behind my air filter unit like it had a lease there, aimed straight at my tool rack and the locked gun cabinet. The model was cheap, something you could pick up online with 2 clicks and no shame, but the message was clear. They weren't done with me. No, this wasn't a one-time scam. This was a recon job. They were watching. Probably logging my routines, cataloging what I owned, and waiting for the perfect moment to come back, like raccoons in matching blazers. That's when I realized if they were going to treat me like bait, I might as well build the trap myself. I didn't touch the camera. I let it stay, like a bad house guest you secretly record to catch stealing silverware. But I did start acting differently. I moved slower. I never opened my cabinets unless I blocked their view. I muttered vague phrases near the lens, like, better move the valuables tomorrow, just to see if they'd bite. Meanwhile, I installed 3 of my own cameras, one above the garage door, one facing the driveway, and one disguised as a motion sensor near the front door. Audio too. If they were going to come back with their clipboards and comedy club badges, I was going to catch every smug word on tape. It wasn't paranoia, it was planning. Because when someone fakes law enforcement and installs tech on your property, that ain't just HOA cosplay. That's criminal with a capital C, and I wanted it on record in high definition. Then came the real performance. I called Vicky using the number on her fake HOA business card. Left a voicemail that said, "Ms. Spangler, this is Calvin Briggs. I've been thinking about our last conversation and I want to resolve this properly. I'd be happy to comply with the HOA inspection and get things squared away. Would you be available this weekend?" I kept my tone flat like I was trying real hard to sound defeated. Just enough bait to lure a predator who's used to people folding. I knew she'd come. She couldn't resist the illusion of control. And I knew she'd bring backup. But I wasn't ready for the new faces. 2 fresh recruits who walked into my garage Saturday morning like they were clocking in at a real job. One was a young guy named Jay, nervous as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs, and the other was a woman named Dana, who looked like she'd just finished training at a place that served donuts in the lobby. Neither of them seemed to know what they were part of. Jay whispered, "Ma'am, this ain't like the training video," while Vicky barked orders like she was running a military drill in stilettos. She wore a blazer with fake patches sewn on, a utility belt that looked like it came from the Halloween clearance aisle, and a folder thick enough to qualify as a flotation device. She strutted in like she was 1 court order away from owning my house. "Mr. Briggs, we're here to complete the compliance inspection and resolve your violations," she said, while Chuck, yes, Chuck was back, stood by the door trying to look intimidating and mostly succeeding in looking like he hadn't slept since 2019. Then came the punchline. "We'll also need the $7,000 0 cents inspection fee in cash, preferably in a sealed plastic bag for processing." I almost choked on my coffee. A sandwich bag? These people wanted to charge me $7,000 0 cents and collect it like it was leftover meatloaf? That was the moment I knew they'd gone from amateur hour to felony dinner theater. But here's the thing. They really thought they were winning. That's what made it dangerous and hilarious all at once. Jay and Dana were clearly confused, asking basic questions like, "What's our insurance policy again?" While Vicky glossed over their doubts with a well-practiced tone of, "Just follow my lead." The contrast between her confidence and their concern was almost poetic. And that's when I knew I had something better than footage. I had witnesses. Innocents dragged into a scam, about to realize the rabbit hole they'd stepped in. I kept everything calm, no confrontations, no shouting, just redirection. "Let's step this way," I said, guiding them exactly where my cameras had the best angle. Because I didn't just want evidence, I wanted a front row seat when the scam fell apart. And trust me, it was already cracking. You could feel it in the silence between Jay's questions and Dana's glances. The rats were sniffing the cheese, but they were starting to notice the snap of metal just behind it. And here's what keeps people watching, not the fall, but the setup, the quiet unraveling, the feeling that justice isn't loud, it's patient. So stay with me, because in the next part, that patience pays off. And what happens when Loretta walks in? Let's just say she doesn't bring cookies. She brings the kind of legal thunder you don't hear until it's too late. You ever see someone walk into a room and change the temperature without saying a word? That was Loretta Shaw on Saturday morning. While Vicky was mid-sentence, trying to convince Jay and Dana that laminated clipboards counted as legal authority, the front door creaked open, and in walked Loretta, calm, composed, and carrying a manila folder that looked like it weighed more than her purse. "Calvin, honey," she called sweetly. "I brought those HOA documents you asked for, the real ones." The air shifted immediately. Vicky froze, Chuck turned toward the door like someone just pulled the fire alarm, and Jay looked like he wanted to dive into the potted plant. I didn't have to say a word. I just stepped back and let the grandmother of due process do her thing. Because when Loretta walks in with paperwork, the party's over, and the audit begins. "Excuse me, ma'am," Vicky snapped, trying to sound official again. "This is an active compliance inspection. Civilian interference is a federal offense." Loretta raised one eyebrow and pulled out a document so pristine it practically glowed under my kitchen lights. "Dear, I worked at the county courthouse for 32 years. I know what a real inspection looks like, and it doesn't involve sandwich bags or clip-on badges. Now, unless you're a licensed investigator bonded by the state of Texas, you are not qualified to be here." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. But it hit harder than a gavel at a sentencing hearing. The contrast was stunning. Vicky, all makeup and improv confidence, next to Loretta, who wielded facts like scalpels and smiled like she was watching a soap opera unfold in real time. I could feel the balance shifting. Vicky was losing the room, and fast. Chuck stepped forward like he thought he was going to reassert control, puffing his chest and saying, "We have backup on the way." That's when Loretta casually pulled out the document that quoted the exact HOA bylaw stating, "Firearm inspections must be requested in writing with 72-hour notice by licensed and insured third-party professionals." "Do you fall under that definition, sir?" she asked. He blinked, and then, in a moment that should be taught in scammer de-escalation training videos, Troy, yes, Chuck's real name was Troy, just threw in the towel. "She wrote all our scripts," he blurted, pointing at Vicky like she'd just stolen his last shred of plausible deniability. "I didn't even want to come today. She said all we had to do was act serious and people would pay." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was delicious. Vicky's face went through all 5 stages of criminal panic, ending in a jaw-clenched stare at Troy that could have melted vinyl siding. Meanwhile, I stood by the counter, checking the angle on my recording devices. Audio? Crisp. Video? Perfect. Loretta had walked in at just the right moment, and everything was now on record. I whispered, mostly for my own amusement, "This is gold. YouTube gold." Not that I'd post it, of course, but the idea of packaging this entire farce as a cautionary tale for retirees with Ring cameras brought me a special kind of joy. It didn't feel like a compliance inspection anymore. It felt like a traveling scam circus with matching clipboards and terrible improvisation. And Loretta? She was the lion tamer, cracking the whip without raising her voice. Even Jay and Dana had stopped pretending they were part of something official. Dana pulled out her phone and started scrolling, probably checking how fast she could update her resume. But here's the kicker, the real payoff. It wasn't just that Vicky's operation was falling apart, it was how calmly it fell apart. No shouting, no fists, just truth walking in with sensible shoes and notarized documents. That's what made it powerful. And as I watched the last thread of Vicky's authority unravel in front of my garage door, I realized something important. Scams don't die in explosions. They die in sunlight. And this room had never been brighter. Stick around. Because the next knock on the door isn't from a scammer. It's from the kind of folks who make courtrooms very real, very fast. You ever see a scammer's face when their bluff gets called by the big leagues? It's a lot like watching someone realize they brought a butter knife to a fencing match. That's what happened when the black SUV pulled into my driveway. Vicky's smug expression flickered just long enough for me to enjoy it. She straightened her blazer, fluffed her hair, and turned toward the door like she was about to be knighted by the Queen herself. But I had a hunch. Government plates don't roll into suburban neighborhoods on a Saturday morning unless something serious is cooking. And when I saw the taller of the two men step out, sunglasses sharp enough to slice bread, I knew we were about to level up from HOA theater to federal reality TV. The senior agent introduced himself as Agent Ruiz, ATF. Calm, unreadable, probably born with a raised eyebrow. But the younger guy? He stared at me for a beat and I could tell something clicked. "Sergeant Briggs?" he asked. "You taught document integrity at Benning, right?" I nodded, half surprised myself. Turns out Agent Dunn had been one of my students back when I was training military intelligence recruits to spot forgeries faster than you can say Comic Sans. We shook hands, respectful, firm. And then, like a switch had flipped, the air changed. Vicky's voice went up an octave. "Thank God you're here," she started, launching into a frantic monologue about threats, illegal weapons, non-compliance, and how I had apparently built a backyard arsenal worthy of a Cold War sequel. Ruiz didn't blink. Dunn didn't even write anything down. They just listened, like pros do, while scanning the room like it was a crime scene, which, frankly, it was. I handed over the so-called court order Vicky had brandished earlier, and Dunn, God bless him, held it up with a look of theatrical disbelief. "Comic Sans?" he muttered. "Seriously?" He passed it to Ruiz, who examined the crooked seal and muttered something about the ink still being wet. Vicky tried to defend the document, saying it had been signed by Judge Thompson from the County Court of Heritage Hills. Ruiz looked up. "There is no County Court of Heritage Hills, ma'am. This area falls under Travis County jurisdiction." She stammered, tried to pivot, blamed the clerk. That's when Troy, who had been hanging back near my bookshelf like a guilty coat rack, finally gave up the ghost. "Look, it wasn't supposed to go this far," he mumbled. "We just figured some folks would pay the inspection fee to avoid trouble. Gun owners get nervous. We didn't mean any harm." That right there? That's the line that broke the whole thing open. Dunn's face went from neutral to something close to disgust. "You targeted legal gun owners?" he asked, the words tight like they were trying not to punch their way out. "Veterans? Rural homeowners? People who wouldn't question fake authority?" Vicky tried to shut Troy up, but it was too late. He spilled everything. How they printed fake documents at a rented office suite. How they posted fake job listings to lure people like Jay and Dana. How they cherry-picked neighborhoods with known veteran populations because they had stuff worth taking and wouldn't call the cops right away. I watched the agents take it all in. Calm and cool on the surface, but you could see the gears turning. This wasn't a one-off. It was a blueprint, and these two had used my neighborhood as their pilot episode. The rest of the morning felt like watching professionals rebuild a crime scene backwards. Dunn collected every forged document. Ruiz took statements. Loretta handed over her annotated folder like it was Exhibit A in a courtroom drama. Even Dana offered her phone records, visibly shaken that she'd been pulled into something criminal while thinking she'd just scored a temp job. But me? I just stood by the doorway, hands in my pockets, watching justice settle into the room like it finally found its seat. All that prep work, all that calm restraint, it paid off, and the look on Vicky's face when Dunn said the words "federal charges pending" was the kind of thing you want to frame. But it wasn't over yet, not by a long shot, because once the ATF opened their case file, we were all about to find out just how far this scam had really spread. Stick with me. What they uncover next doesn't just change the game, it changes the scoreboard. 3 months later, my garage smelled like it always had, old oil, gunmetal, and quiet. I was back at the bench wiping down the same Springfield that started this circus when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from the Travis County Prosecutor's Office. Vicky Spangler had been sentenced to 3 years in federal prison, with $180,000, 0 cents in restitution to the 7 families she'd scammed. Troy, now officially government property, got 18 months and a restraining order that forbade him from being within 500 feet of anything shaped like a clipboard. The best part? Loretta texted me 5 minutes later with an update to her spiral notebook titled Rogues of Heritage Hills. Entry 14, Vicky, Comic Sans, Spangler, convicted fraudster, theatrical scammer, underachieving villain, and underlined, naturally, bold as a red flag at a bullfight. Justice, it turned out, has a great sense of timing and a better sense of humor. But justice didn't stop at the courtroom doors. The Heritage Hills HOA board called me in for a meeting, not to accuse, but to offer. They'd been so spooked by how close this whole scam had gotten that they voted unanimously to create a new volunteer position, Community Integrity Advisor. Translation? They wanted someone who could smell nonsense before it hit the fan, someone who'd actually read the bylaws and could spot a fake inspection the way a rancher spots a wolf in thrift store sheepskin. I accepted, not for the title, not even for the tiny stipend. I accepted because every neighborhood deserves someone who knows when to ask questions and isn't afraid to push back when the answers come in Comic Sans and bad cologne. When the official paperwork arrived, I signed it at my kitchen table with my grandfather's old fountain pen, the same pen he used to write letters home from the South Pacific, the same one I used to sign my retirement forms when I left the Army. There was something poetic about using it now to defend a different kind of homeland, one lined with fences, bird feeders, and the kind of neighbors who watch your house when you're out of town. I thought about everything we'd been through, about Loretta standing tall with her folder, about Dana and Jay realizing they'd been used, about Dunn, the student who became the agent, standing next to me as the dominoes fell. The kind of justice that arrives slowly but lands like a steel beam. And you know what stuck with me most? It wasn't just that we stopped a scam, it was how we did it, with patience, with precision, with a refusal to be bullied by clipboards and false confidence. Vicky came in loud, fast, and dressed like she bought her power at a mall kiosk. But in the end, it was the quiet voices, the retired clerk, the cautious veteran, the neighbor with a notebook, who rewrote the story. No shouting, no spectacle, just the steady, deliberate work of people who knew better, who observed, who assessed, and when the moment came, acted with everything they had. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that real power doesn't come from fake patches or knockoff badges. It comes from knowing what's right and having the guts to stand by it. So yeah, turns out Comic Sans can get you 3 to 5 in a federal facility, and a rubber HOA stamp off eBay, that'll earn you a chapter in Loretta's notebook and a place in neighborhood folklore. But what matters most isn't how they fell. It's what we built afterward. Stronger connections, sharper eyes. A community that knows how to fight smart. So if you're watching this, wondering what you'd do if someone knocked on your door with empty threats and crooked seals, remember this. You don't have to yell to win. You don't have to chase them down the street. You just have to pay attention, observe, assess, act. And never, ever underestimate what one smart neighbor, a working camera, and a well-timed folder can do. And as I stood on my porch that evening, watching the sun dip behind the rooftops of Heritage Hills, I realized something deeper than justice had happened here. This wasn't just a story about a scam gone sideways. It was about what happens when quiet people like you and me, decide they've had enough. When we stop accepting fake authority, when we lean on our experience, our community, and that gut feeling that says this isn't right, we don't just protect our homes, we restore something bigger. We restore the idea that truth doesn't need a megaphone. It just needs someone brave enough to speak it. So if you got anything from this story, I hope it's this. The calmest voice in the room is often the most dangerous to people who lie for a living. And the best protection you'll ever have isn't a security system or a badge. It's your mind, your memory, your neighbors, and your willingness to ask, where's the real proof? Because sometimes the sharpest weapon you can carry is a well-read bylaw and a retired clerk with a folder. We turned a scam into a masterclass. We turned chaos into clarity. And we reminded each other that even in the age of fake everything, truth still knows how to walk into a room and win. If this story made you think, made you laugh, or made you feel like maybe the world's not as upside down as it seems, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Hit that like button if you believe standing up to bullies, clipboards, and all is still worth doing. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story, it'll make you believe again in neighbors, in second chances, and in the power of a single voice to change everything. Until next time, observe, assess, act, and keep your folders and your cameras ready.